Why is there no perfect sampler?
All I want is the perfect sampler.
There's this YouTube channel out there where this guy, who's like a national treasure in Canada, makes video after video, searching for the perfect camera. He wears this stylish fur cap, even though he lives quite a bit south of me. Most Canadians live south of me.
Who left the fridge open?
In my recent search for the perfect sampler, I can relate to my Canadian friend. On your PC or Mac, there is no perfect DAW, but even a DAW with a number of flaws has loads more functionality than any hardware sampler or groovebox. If I want more synths, I can just buy more VSTs, many at $20 or $50 a pop, and find ones that do exactly what I want. If I want more effects, I can just buy more effects and then stack dozens of these effects in any order and send them out on buses with crazy LFOs and filters. For pure power and flexibility, you just can't beat software. But software doesn't offer the immediacy or hands-on control or dopamine release that you can get with cocaine. I mean, a groovebox.
This is your brain on drugs.
It's also a bit of a pain to take a computer to a gig or use a laptop on a couch to make beats. It just doesn't feel right.
Your gun is digging into my hip.
Thus, the hardware-software wars rage on. I'm definitely like Switzerland in this fight. I don't care if I use hardware or software. I like both. There are distinct pros and cons for each one, and recently, because I have become obsessed with researching grooveboxes, I started to find out that some of the cons of hardware grooveboxes really suck.
Suck.
The biggest difficulty in purchasing a piece of hardware is cost. You can buy 2, 4, or 8 times as much capability in software as you can in hardware for the same price. So, if you screw up and purchase a piece of software that doesn't really click with you, or one that you don't use much, it's not as big of a deal. But if you spend $500 or $1,000 or say $5,000 on a piece of hardware and you don't like it, well, that's painful. The second biggest difficulty I'm running into with grooveboxes in particular is the strange lack of a song mode in a pretty wide swath of affordable beatmakers. Once you get above $700 or $800, that kind of goes away, but for anything below $500, it's a problem. I mean, the whole idea of owning one of these things is to make a song and save it somewhere, right? Sure, I could make a dozen or so separate 4-bar loops and download them all into a DAW, and then copy and paste them and do my side chains and, oh man, now you got me using a DAW. And stuff like that just angers the DAWless people. And you really don't want to get them angry. Besides, you're trying to sell these things to the DAWless people. They're one of your biggest supporters. So why wouldn't you include a song mode so that you can actually save a song? Okay, rant over. Let's do some comparisons. I ran across this song mode problem with my very first groovebox purchase last year. Even though I own a few keyboards, I've never purchased a hardware groovebox or sampler until recently. Okay, I did own an Alesis drum machine for a long time, but that thing just wasn't very inspiring to me for some reason, even though it's like the most popular drum machine ever produced. Do people still actually buy these things? So if you or I are in the market for a groovebox that is 1, portable, and 2, less than, let's say, $500 at the high end, and 3, has a song mode, what are the choices? This is what I came up with. I've tried to be as accurate with this as possible, but if there are mistakes, leave a comment because it's important to have accurate information to make informed purchases. And it's probably the fault of my research assistant. After looking at the chart above, there are actually a few more boxes that have song mode than what I was originally thinking. But the choices are still a bit limited. There's nothing less than $300 and only 3 to choose from in the under $400 category. Note that several boxes have pattern chaining or maybe some sort of limited song mode, so I've tried to identify that. This might work for some people's use case, but I'm not sure that it will work for mine, so I'm going to take those off the list and narrow the field a bit. Sorry 404 lovers, you can stop watching now and leave comments about my stupidity below.
Ugh. Idiot.
This leaves us with 6 boxes to compare. Note that I've added a plus and minus to the portability category, and I'll break up those into 2 teams. Size probably matters to a lot of musicians, but it could really matter on stage where you might not always have a ton of room to lay out multiple keyboards or samplers that are larger than, say, a 10 by 10 square. If you're on stage and playing even a 61-key synth, that usually doesn't leave much room for a separate groovebox, especially if you're using an analog beast with knob complex syndrome. You might have room for a Polyend and a couple of smaller boxes like the 1010 black box, But you might not always have room for, say, a Polyend, an MC707, and something else. If you do have room, you also have to consider moving around on stage to control everything. A full-size 88-key rig is going to be around 4 foot long, so if there's no room on top to put things, then you are moving off the keyboard to control other gear, which you might or might not be able to do during a performance. One final note on portability is that too small can also be an issue, especially if you have large hands. Something like the OPZ and Nano boxes might appeal to some, but be a hindrance to others because they are too difficult to play at that size. There is also a sizable build quality difference between these two camps. While I'm liking a lot of the features of the Yamaha Seqtrak and its size, the brushed aluminum and high-end parts on the Novation and Polyend units are definitely appealing. I'm also liking the features of the Smpltrek, but the small knobs and frankly awful-looking color combo are a bit off-putting. Sorry, Smpltrek lovers. Finally, if portability is king above all else, then the OPZ could be a big winner for you. So having a song mode is good, but if you can't save a ton of songs, or if you are really limited in song size due to the sequencer or memory issues, then that's not great. From the next comparison chart, the track count between all these is fairly similar, with the Seqtrak and Circuit tracks being high and low standouts. All of these boxes offer a pretty robust amount of steps and patterns, but the number of project storage on the actual device is noticeably lacking on the two smallest machines here. This is alleviated somewhat with the ability to store items in their respective apps. The Seqtrak and OPZ also do not have an SD card slot, and the user memory on the OPZ is, well, very small. If song mode is of great importance to you, then the Smpltrek and Play score the best, with the number of songs or projects above 100. All the boxes on here have good track count and plenty of steps and patterns.
That's right.
If sampling is the most important item to you, then the groove boxes on this list are a huge mixed bag. All of these units allow you to record samples directly to the box via microphone, except for the Circuit tracks and Play, which could be a deal breaker for some. Also, a bit of a bummer in this price range is that only the Seqtrak and Smpltrek have stereo samples. All the other units are mono, although you can use effects to make them stereo. Note that the number of samples listed is typically the total number of samples that you can load into a project, but these machines all define projects and tracks a bit differently. The Seqtrak, for instance, has thousands of sounds, but you can only use 7 samples in the single sample track, while each of the drum tracks can have its own sample. The biggest winner here is the Smpltrek, with solid numbers across the board and 3 full audio tracks. If you are looking for a device in this price range that includes synth engines, then there is not a whole lot to choose from. All of the units have a sample-based engine, while the Seqtrak has an additional 4-op FM engine, and the Circuit tracks has a digital analog engine with 2 oscillators, noise engine, and ring mod. The OPZ states that it has 12 synthesis-based sound engines, but that sounds like marketing talk to me.
Down at Mike's Golf Shop, where we buy golf.
I feel like that is not the same thing as the 9 engines packed into a Korg Kronos, and it's not. But if we are talking strictly synthesis, then the OPZ comes out shining if Microsoft Copilot is to be believed. These, of course, are not going to be full-fledged engines matching the level of the Kronos, but it's really impressive for a product of this size. Note that the effects count is a bit deceiving here. For instance, the Novation Circuit tracks and Rhythm have 24 different effects listed in their manual, but that's really just 24 reverb and delay presets. There is no saturator or bit crusher or really anything else. Play, on the other hand, has 5 effects and 2 filters with way more presets, so it is much more versatile. The clear winner here is the Seqtrak with 2 synth engines, 128-note polyphony, and a ton of presets and effects. Next up for comparisons is the number of knobs, pads, and faders for each unit. Of note here is that all boxes have endless encoders, only 1 has touch-sensitive faders, and only 3 have velocity-sensitive pads. The Seqtrak scores very well even though it doesn't have velocity-sensitive pads, and although the Play also does not have velocity-sensitive pads, the huge number of pads and touch-sensitive knobs is a big plus. You might score this category differently though, based on what is important to you. Note that the pad numbers just include pads for inputting beats and don't include buttons or pads for other controls, and the negative sign indicates buttons rather than rubber pads, which are usually less desirable for most people. The Smpltrek, Circuit tracks, and Circuit Rhythm are reported to have pads that are really well liked.
Tiffany's?
One final comparison and something to consider is connectivity of the instruments. I've got photos of the backs of each unit so you can see side by side the connectivity options. Higher ratings here indicate more inputs and outputs. Note that none of the scores are very high, and that is partly due to the cost of each unit and also partly due to their size. Super portability means limited connectivity. For comparisons, something like a Roland MC707, Roland TR8S, or Behringer RD8 would likely score in the 4.5 plus range. It's time to add up the results. Keep in mind that there is a bit of subjectivity here. Thus, if the perfect sampler for you must have a screen or must have resampling, then your ratings could be considerably different. I think that these numbers really show the difference between budget and mid-range boxes compared to full-fledged units like the Deluge, for instance, which would likely score all 4s and 5s instead of 3s and 4s. This is also just an aggregate score of the items compared today, and it's not meant to exactly be a rank order for these boxes, but just to give you an idea of where they fall in the overall capability department. It doesn't take into account things like workflow or menu diving, or how good or not so good the samples and onboard effects are, or the fact that you love your Roland SP404 Mark II and nothing in the universe could ever compare, not even a solid platinum grand piano.
Winning.
The top 3 are not a huge surprise, except maybe for the Smpltrek, which has some pretty solid numbers. The Yamaha Seqtrak scored very well, especially considering its price, and the Play didn't surprise me too much because I think that it is a very capable unit considering the recent price drop. So that's it for our deep dive comparison of low and mid-range groove boxes. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the other side of the mountain.